Hello and welcome to another installment of WGBH's Digital Town Halls with the presidential candidates seeking the Democratic nomination in 2020 and the Republican candidates. We had Bill Weld a little while ago. I'm Adam Reilly. I'm a reporter at WGBH, and I am joined today by Tom Steyer. He is, as many of you watching online and many of you watching in the library already know, an incredibly successful financier and a liberal activist who has spent significant amounts of his own money to advocate for a more aggressive response to climate change and the impeachment of President Donald Trump. And now he is a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. Tom Steyer, thank you for being here.
Adam, good morning.
Let me start by asking you a pretty obvious question. What is it that you believe you bring to the race for the Democratic nomination that your fellow Democrats do not?
Well, I think I'm saying something different than they're saying, and I believe I have a different background than they have. You know, I'm running for a very specific reason. I believe that the government is broken, that it's been purchased by corporations, that it's stopped working for the American people across the board. So whereas I know that Americans in the 21st century have rights that are not being met, right for affordable health care, right for quality public education from pre-K through college, a right to a living wage, a right to clean air and clean water. We're not going to get any of those rights met until we break this stranglehold that corporations have on our government. And I've spent 10 years as an outsider putting together coalitions of ordinary American citizens to fight that unchecked corporate power. And we've been winning for a decade. So when you think about me versus everyone else in the race, I'm an outsider. And if you believe that we have to change Washington, D.C., and we have to break the stranglehold these corporations have on our government, you have to ask who you can trust.
I want to ask you to recap some of what you've accomplished over the past decade. But before I do that, your resume is certainly different than hers, but as you describe your assessment of Washington and the way government works or doesn't work, your take sounds to me pretty similar to Elizabeth Warren's, who of course is the senator one of the senators representing Massachusetts. Again, she's in the Senate, you are not. You have run a very successful hedge fund, she has not. But am I right that your diagnosis of the problem is not far off from hers and maybe from some other candidates? I mean, I don't know that Bernie Sanders would radically disagree with the diagnosis you offered.
Well, let me say this. I think my solutions are completely different. Look, I'm talking about term limits for Congress people and senators of 12 years. There is no one else running for the Democratic nomination who will even utter the words term limits. You know, Congress is not supposed to be a lifetime appointment. We really need to get some new blood in there completely and some new energy. So that's first of all.
Okay.
Second of all, part of what I've done is to run propositions on the ballot in states for progressive ideas and won. And I look at the United States government and it's broken. We aren't dealing with the problems. So another thing I'd like to have the ability of the American people to directly pass laws, a national referendum. There's no one else saying this, Adam. I'm saying that and I'll give you an example. Over 90% of Americans want mandatory background checks on every gun purchase and have wanted it for decades. That's Democrats, Republicans, and independents. We've had a series of famously horrible tragedies in terms of mass shootings. There is an outcry after every one of them, and nothing happens. Mm-hmm. And in particular, the easiest thing that everybody in the country practically wants doesn't happen, which is background checks, mandatory background checks on gun purchases. Why is that true? So the answer is the gun manufacturers stop it. It isn't the members of the NRA. The majority of NRA members want it. It's that the gun manufacturers stop it. The corporations are
with the assistance of people in Congress, right?
Yes. And so if we could actually put it on the ballot and have Americans vote yay or nay, we'd pass that in a heartbeat.
How might that work? Imagine that you are elected president. How would you try to implement direct democracy in a case such as that? What would it look like?
Literally, you'd have to get a certain number of signatures. The way that it works, and this, Adam, this isn't an unknown thing. This exists in 26 of the 50 states.
Yeah, I mean, we do it here.
So it's not unknown. You get a certain number of signatures that qualifies it to be on the ballot. Then when you go in and vote for, Senate, governor, congressperson, state leg, state senate, there's a thing that says yes or no, background checks, mandatory background checks, and there's a little description, and you pass it or not.
What would it take to make that a reality constitutionally? I mean, is there any precedent for that being done at the national level?
In the United States,
Yeah.
no. It's a change.
Yep.
But I'm saying, one of the things I'm saying, Adam, is I'm looking for actual structural change. I'm sitting here and looking at a broken system, and the question you have to ask yourself is, which way are you going to go? Are you going to ask politicians to solve it, or are you going to try and give more power to the people? And my reaction is,
You want to devolve it to the people.
I want more direct democracy, and that's what, if you look at my career, that's what I've pushed for. I've pushed for propositions to let the people win, and I think it's been a gigantic success. I've built
When you say let the people win,
well, okay, the oil companies want to do something, let's take them on. The tobacco companies don't want to do something, let's make it happen. The utilities won't put in clean energy, okay, let's go to the people and put in new rules. But also, I've built one of the largest grassroots organizations in the United States, Next Gen America. In 2018, we did the largest youth voter mobilization in American history. And my point was, nobody thought it made sense to organize young people in the United States. Think about that. That's the
I
largest.
think some people thought it made sense.
No, that's not true. There's no group that was specifically organized to do that. And that is the largest, age cohort in the United States, bigger than the boomers. We're voting at less than 1 out of 5. So if they were organizing them, they weren't doing a very good job. And I can tell you that we went into 38 congressional districts and more than doubled the turnout between 2014, the last midterm election, and last year.
I want to ask you one more direct democracy question before we talk about other stuff. My guess is that some people who like the idea of direct democracy, if it, for example, leads to more stringent gun control, might also be a little concerned about what it could yield if the majority happens to want something that they don't think is a very good idea. We had, as you know, in Massachusetts, a great big back and forth over the legalization of gay marriage here, same-sex marriage. It occurred in the courts, and then there was a fight to keep it from going to a popular vote because, as the people who did not want it to go to a popular vote argued, civil rights should not be put on the ballot. Isn't there a risk if you move toward more direct democracy that sometimes the people are going to do what you want them to do and sometimes they're going to do the opposite?
There is a risk to everything. I think that's fair to say, Adam. We have a broken system. We have a system that is completely failing. Is it possible that people will make mistakes? Of course it's possible that people will make mistakes. They can also be undone, in fact. So if something happens and it's misunderstood or somehow it doesn't turn out in a way that you think reflects the popular will or that seems unfair, you can put it back on the ballot. We have a broken system. I mean, if you sit here and say, there could be mistakes if we go to the people, of course there could. That's democracy. It's kind of messy. But you know something? We have a broken system right now. It's not like we're comparing it to a system that's functioning well and doing
all
It's like
firing on all cylinders.
It's totally not working.
Let me interrupt you for just a second to tell people watching and tell people out in the audience that as I chat here with Tom Steyer, you are free to suggest questions for him that you'd like to have asked. I will do my best to get to as many of your questions as I can. We've already got a bunch, which I should get to very soon. But in the meantime, please submit them if you have them. If you're in the library, you can bring them up to us, and we'll try to ask them.
Can I make one other point,
Absolutely. And then I lied. I want to ask one more direct democracy question.
That's okay. Would you want to do that and then not? Because
Sure, and then I'll let you.
You said, how am I different? There's some other way that I'm completely different.
Okay, good. Then we'll hit that. One other thing that more direct democracy would do is it would empower people who, like you, have a great deal of money. If you want to push a particular cause, if I want to push something to have people vote on it, I don't have the financial muscle to get the message out. You do, people who are very different politically than you also do, but it's a small group of people that would exercise a great deal of sway. Shouldn't that give people pause too?
Well, actually what we've seen in California is that the people who have the most sway are the people who are the best organized. That in fact, it hasn't been something where the corporations have tried to do things through the ballot. But I think as long as there's good transparency in terms of where the money's coming from, if you get a corporation that has no credibility with the people, as long as it's clear that on every ad who's paying for it, it really doesn't matter what they say. You know, people just dismiss it. I think the way that you actually get credibility in these public campaigns is to have people talking who are trusted. And I'll give you an example. When we took on the oil companies, when they were trying to roll back the most progressive energy laws in the world, which are California's energy laws, the person who was the most convincing was a woman who was the head of the American Lung Association in California, talking about clean air. Because everybody knows she was the head of the American Lung Association, and people listened to her, and she was saying, look, if we do this, this is what's going to happen to air, that's what it's going to mean for asthma, that's what it's going to mean for your kids. You know, this is something where you can trust me that this is the right decision. And people were like, okay, that's actually what's convincing. Sometimes money is able to fool people into doing nothing, but it's very rarely able to convince people to do something.
Now I got to give you a chance to detail some other ways in which you are different than your fellow candidates.
Okay, there are two things I should definitely bring up. One is, I am the person in this race who is saying that climate is the number one priority. I'm the only person in this race who will say, period, it's the number one priority. I would declare a state of emergency on day one. I would use the emergency powers of the presidency. And I'd like to say this, we absolutely have to do this, but you should know, we absolutely can do this. This is, for people who feel like this is such a big problem, we can't solve it. We can solve it for sure. But the other thing that you should know is solving it will bring a host of good things. We'll create literally millions of good paying union jobs across the country. So when you look at income inequality, this is a huge step to creating living wage jobs across the country. Second of all, we can clean up the air and water as a result of dealing with climate. And in particular, we can go into the low-income communities and black and brown communities where this society has concentrated the air pollution and concentrated the water pollution and make sure that our policies deal directly with their needs and that their leadership on both policy and execution is central to what we're doing. I call it a justice-centered climate plan. That is critical. And in addition, people talk about, how are we ever going to come together? You know, you must hear this all the time. I hear it all the time, Adam. Democrats and Republicans are so divided. There's so much animosity. There's so much distrust. Look, we have a gigantic challenge in front of us. We're the only country in the world that can lead the world to solve it, the only one. We can go back to being the moral leader of the world and making ourselves better employed, better paid, and healthier, but we absolutely have to do it, and it's a gigantic challenge for the whole country, not for Democrats, not for Republicans. You know, you want to pull us together? How about if we save the world together? How about if we actually take on a gigantic challenge together, meet it, and come together in meeting it?
How do you make that a unifying proposition? It's very appealing as you describe it, but how do you make that a unifying proposition? I wish I had the number ready for instant recall, but when a sizable portion of Republicans don't think climate change is real, or don't think man-made climate change is real.
Well, let me put it to you this way. The jobs are real. The clean air is real. The clean water is real. The ability to lift up the whole country from an economic standpoint is real. Dealing with our inequality is real. So if you're looking at some of the most depressed parts of the country, and you know, part of this job, for 7 years I've been traveling around this country, and there are parts of this country that are booming, and there are parts of this country that are having really tough economic times. Most Americans are still not recovered from 2008. You know, the inequality in this country over the last 40 years is unjust, undemocratic, totally wrong, and gigantic. This is an absolute address to that. So whether you think We need, and most Americans actually do believe we need clean energy, overwhelmingly across party lines. But taking on this task together is a way for us to reach out and partner with some of the most depressed parts of America, specifically to create millions and millions of jobs. We have to rebuild this country on an accelerated basis.
So you wanted to highlight your focus on climate and climate change. You just did. Was there one other thing that you wanted to
The other thing that I think is different about me
on?
is this. Look, I built a business from scratch. I started, really with nothing, no employees in one room, and built a big business over 27 years. And then I walked away from it. I took the giving pledge to give more than half my money to good causes during my life. But my point is this. If there's someone in this race who can go toe-to-toe with Republicans on economics, prosperity, growth, it's me. I've spent decades thinking about it. I've spent decades having to be right about it and understanding it. When Mr. Trump he's going to say, in many ways I'm an unattractive person. In many ways I'm a hateful person. Yes, check. But I'm good on the economy. And the answer is, oh, by the way, you were a fake businessman and you failed. You're a fake president when it comes to the economy and you failed there too. And I think I'm the person on this stage who has the most experience, the most learning, the best ability to actually do what Bill Clinton said in 1992. It's the economy, stupid. Okay, fine. If it's the economy, stupid, I'm the guy.
Let's talk more in a little bit about your business track record, but first I'm going to be exposed as a liar if I don't ask you a whole bunch of audience questions. So let me start throwing them at you. Katie on Twitter asks, why should people vote for somebody who has not previously been elected? Wouldn't a good response to Trump be someone with directly applicable experience? What do you say?
Say, look, I've spent 10 years in the political system just as an outsider. Actually, if you want to see who's gotten things done in the political system, take a look. I've taken on oil companies and beaten them. I've taken on tobacco companies who won 17 times in a row, got $3 to $4 billion a year in taxes and gave it to Medi-Cal, which is the healthcare system for the lowest income Californians, closed $1 billion tax loophole that the legislature couldn't close, gave it to the public schools. That in fact, if you want to see someone who's actually accomplished things in politics, it's actually me. And so if you think we need to change politics and get things done, that if this is about action, take a look at who's taken action and succeeded.
A couple more here really quickly. You mentioned, some unnamed, I think, audience member writes, you mentioned California's oil standards. In California over the last 35 years, our oil demand has not decreased, but we've shifted to a reliance on foreign regimes with dismal human rights records. If you support California's attack on oil, including Governor Newsom's 6 signed bills, you also support shifting reliance on shifting reliance to foreign nations like Saudi Arabia. How do you suggest we address this without relying on regimes that don't let women have rights?
Well, let me say this. What I believe we need to do is get off fossil fuels. And so when we think about oil, I'm thinking about the entire suite of fossil fuels. And part of this has to do with transportation. And at this point, I think that certainly in California, the biggest source of greenhouse gases from California by far is transportation. So in fact, what we really need to do is be moving much more to electric vehicles, to public transportation, and that's what we should be spending a ton of effort and time to make sure it occurs. So in fact, what we really need to do is to change how we use energy in transportation dramatically, and that's where we have to go. And if you look at stuff that I've supported, that's really where we're going very hard. We shouldn't be building more fossil fuel infrastructure. I've fought against pipelines and against new fossil fuel power plants successfully. But the reason I've done it is because we need to make a change. We need to change the way we move around. It's not going to make it more expensive. It's not going to make it more difficult. We have to do it, and it's really going that way that counts.
Let me ask one more, and then I'll get back to a couple of my questions. Kevin on Twitter asks you, if you really care about these issues, why waste money on a long shot presidential bid rather than funding a strategy to lock down as many House and Senate seats for pro-environment candidates as you can?
So what I would say to Kevin is this. I started one of the biggest grassroots organizations in the United States. I'm still supporting it. I'm not running it anymore. But it's not a question of either or. I'm still doing that. If he's concerned that we should be pushing towards that? We are. It's just I'm not running it, and I think I have to keep a distance for legal purposes. But in fact, everything that he wants us to do, I'm doing. We're still, we also have a partnership with, I think, 7 national labor unions to go knock on doors. It's called For Our Future. We knocked on 15 million doors in 2016. We knocked on over 10 million doors in 2018. It's ongoing. So all of the grassroots things that Kevin would like to have me be doing, I am doing.
Okay. Please keep the questions coming. Again, a reminder that you're watching Tom Steyer, the Democratic presidential candidate, talking with me, Adam Reilly from WGBH's Boston Public Library studios, in the latest installment of our digital town halls with candidates seeking the presidency in 2020. Let me ask you to talk a little bit about your experience starting and running the hedge fund that you created. As you know, we are in a political moment where there is a great deal of animosity directed toward the world of finance, broadly speaking. I'd love to get your take as someone who accrued a great deal of personal wealth running a hedge fund, succeeded by all measures that I'm aware of. I'd love to get your take on the ways in which hedge funds and big finance contribute to the national good and the ways in which they may be detriments to the national good. And if you can, I'd love to know if your perspective on that has changed over the past couple of decades.
Well, look, I think I'll give you the good side, and then we'll talk about the problems.
Okay.
Well, let's just start. The inequality in the United States is unacceptable. The inequality in terms of income has done nothing but grow over the last 40 years, and working Americans haven't had a raise in 40 years. That's 90% of Americans. It's incredible. That's never happened in American history. When I say that the government's been bought by corporations, this is the absolute proof that it's true. They've attacked the labor movement. They've attacked the ability of people to organize and stand up for themselves and negotiate. It's been a concerted war on working families for 40 years, and it's been very, very successful, and it's unacceptable. So let's just say,
okay,
I'm for rolling back all the tax cuts on rich people and big corporations. I'm for a wealth tax. I came out for one more than a year ago, long before I even thought about running for president. I was for a wealth tax because I said it's not just the income, it's also the assets. It's undemocratic, it's unjust, it's unfair. So that's one thing.
Just to hop on that for 1 second, how is your wealth tax proposal different than Elizabeth Warren's?
I think it starts lower. I think I came out for it a year ago. We haven't updated it from a year ago. I think we're going to be more complete. It starts at a lower place than she does. And I think it doesn't go to as high a rate, is what I'd say.
Okay.
But I think if you're going to represent the Democratic Party, you have to be dealing with inequality. I've said if Mike Bloomberg wants to represent Democrats, he's got to embrace a wealth tax because you have to upfront understand this inequality is unjust and unsustainable in any kind of society, fair society. So let's just start with that. I want to make sure we start with that. Here's the good part about our finance system. It's the most effective in the world. If you think about what finance does, it allocates money to investments. It prices investments. It directs money. And we have the most sophisticated, effective finance system in the world, by far. And if you think about the advantages that America has in competing around the world, this is a huge advantage. Huge. Having said which, the political part of this is absolutely unacceptable. So, I don't know if you know this, Adam, but my wife and I started a community bank about 14 years ago. And we did it partially in response to the fact that these banks they're very effective at making money and finding good investments. What they're not very effective in doing is supporting people. So we started from scratch a community bank dedicated to economic justice, environmental sustainability, and supporting businesses owned by women and people of color. We've grown it from nothing to over $1 billion. My wife is the CEO. And so when I look at the political power that finance has, that big banks and insurance companies and Wall Street has, it's absolutely wrong. And you can see it in loopholes. You can see it in the way they're treated politically. It's got to change. I mean, they are one of the biggest controllers of this government that there are. And I'll give you an example of something that I thought was absolutely wrong. The mortgage crisis involved defrauding millions of Americans where they lost their homes. It caused immense pain across this country. The banks got bailed out. They got saved. Nobody lost their jobs. Well, that's not fair, but I mean, some did, but basically they got bailed out. And no one went to jail. There was massive fraud on homeowners.
You think people should have gone to jail?
There's no question. Look, they paid $330 billion in fines, and no one went to jail. Is it possible? I mean, just step back for 1 second and say, you stole $330 billion and no one went to jail? Is that, are those two numbers possibly consistent? So, and if you look and see, look, that was wrong. It is, you know, just because you draw a corporate legal shell around something doesn't mean you get to cheat people. Doesn't mean you get to conspire to addict them to opioids. You know, we have to, I think people in corporations have to understand what they do is going to count towards them personally. And we have to drive that home. I think that's a different standard, honestly, Adam. So I look at this and say, do I believe that the banks and finance system deals adequately with the needs of the American people? No, that we started a bank to prove it doesn't. That the places they won't go are the places we automatically go to support people who are being unfairly discriminated against.
We're talking, you know, as we discuss these issues, I think broadly speaking about the, among other things, the moral ambiguity of money and the power of money. You have taken some heat for some investments that your hedge fund made. And I know you've responded to criticism, but I want to bring it up here and get you to talk about this a little bit. Your fund, your hedge fund, I believe in your time there, invested, according to the Times, New York Times, hundreds of millions of dollars in companies that run coal mines and coal-powered plants. People have pointed out there's a tension between those investments and your focus on the environment now. You also invested, I think, $34 million in the Corrections Corporation of America, which runs migrant detention centers on the U.S.-Mexico border. What would you say to voters who are troubled by those investments?
Well, let me take them in order. Look, we invested, when it comes to fossil fuels, we invested in every part of the economy. We invested less in fossil fuels as a percentage of the economy, but we invested in them. When I realized that that they had a gigantic unintended side effect of global warming, that they were threatening the health and safety of Americans, I divested from fossil fuels. It's a big reason I left, is I felt, yeah, this is a huge problem. I've spent over a decade working on this problem. I have spent, you know, and I fought the oil and gas companies. I fought the utilities. I've pushed on this for over a decade, and I divested. So in terms of that, I'd say this. I came to a conclusion over 10 years ago that this was a problem, and I took action on it. And that's exactly what everybody else in the United States, I'm asking them to do. Look, we come from a fossil fuel driven economy. All of us. We all.
By the way, I drove in here today. I don't want to make it sound like I hitchhiked or something.
No, we are in a fossil fuel driven economy. I'm saying, and I came to this conclusion over a decade, oh my God, we have to change that. It's absolutely essential, and I took action on it. And so before that, did I just think, oh, this is going to solve itself? I thought the US government worked. And I thought, if there's a problem, they're going to deal with it. It's a pretty good government. And I discovered, in this case, this is the first instance where I thought, my God, the US government isn't working in a critical part, and I started to take action on that.
I got to ask you, before we turn to the prison investments, was there an epiphany moment where you thought, I was going to use a profane term I can't use, I think, on the internet, or certainly here at the Boston Public Library, where you thought, oh my God, this is a gargantuan problem, and we are careening down the wrong track?
Honestly, Adam, what really happened is we were probably sitting around the dining room table, the six of us, my wife and our 4 kids, probably somewhere 12 years ago, is my guess. And we were talking about, in 100 years, what are people going to look back and say, these guys were just brain dead? Like, they missed the big point. They absolutely, and we were sitting there and we started talking about it, and we came up with climate. We're like, oh my God. So it was really sitting around the dining room table, BSing with my family and talking about what we really care about and what are we going to see, and thinking, oh my gosh, we should let's not be the brain dead people. that it was a very personal. And then I started doing research, and then I went through a series of things to think this could be the problem. I started investing in research into clean tech, thinking if I supported basic research, it could happen faster. And then I did a series of bipartisan objective studies to prove that if we don't deal with it, it'll be a huge problem. And if we do deal with it, we'll be better off, better employed, higher wages, faster growth. No one listened. The studies are out there. It's called the Risky Business Project. I did it with...
It's a good name, too.
I did it with, Republicans and independents to prove this is not just a Democratic project. We got a whole bunch of CEOs around the country to buy into it and to support it. And it was basically saying, here's objective fact. For America, it's much better to deal with this. No one listened. I mean, this was sort of the process, but I can tell you, in terms of fossil fuels, do I wish I'd figured it out sooner? Of course I wish I'd figured it out sooner. When I figured it out, I took action. And let me say this about the Corrections Corp.
Yes.
We made an investment in that. I was concerned, there was an argument at the time, this was at the very beginning, and there was an argument that private prisons were going to do a better job and do a better job specifically of rehabilitation. And I was worried about it from the beginning. And after we'd owned it for a little while, I decided, you know what? I was wrong morally. Let's just sell it. We're out. And we sold it there for the specific reason that I thought I'd made a mistake. Not an investment mistake, but that it isn't right to make money from that. And so we sold it. So again, this was 15 years ago, way before people were talking about this. I decided on my own, look, it's just wrong. And I fought again, and subsequent to that, also, I've worked to end hiring private prisons. It's not right. And so, once again, we were investing in a bunch of things, and I decided this is a moral mistake because I don't believe you should profit from it. And so if we make a mistake, okay, let's deal with that, let's do the right thing, and let's push for the right thing. And that's exactly what happened in this case.
You're hearing from Tom Steyer, the Democratic candidate for President of the United States, in the latest digital town hall from the Boston Public Library's WGBH studio. Now let me run some more audience questions by you so I don't leave too many of those for the very end. Heidi on Twitter. Well, I think we may have answered Heidi's question, which was, what can you do for the country more than any other candidate? I think we sort of started there. Apologies, Heidi. Emily on Twitter asks, you come off as sincere and likable in your TV ads. So you have that going for you. But, Emily adds,
oh no, but?
Are voters wary of people who try to buy their likability instead of earning it?
Look, and let me say this to Emily. Please take a look at what I've done. Please go back and see what I've done. I have a track record of over a decade of successfully organizing Americans to win and to stand up for our rights. And I have a track record of actually pushing for more democracy and more power directly to the people. And it's long, it's deep. It's not something I do in my spare time. It's all I do. It's literally all I've done. People ask me, what is it like running for president? People always say, is it grueling? Is it really tiring? And I'm sort of like, it's kind of the same job I've been doing. It's going around the country and talking to people and listening to people and trying to get them engaged.
As you offer that response to Emily, I shouldn't pat myself on the back for this. I feel like I hear some palpable frustration. Do you feel like too often people are not aware of what you've been doing for the last decade plus and just see you as a guy who happens to be extremely wealthy and has decided he's going to run for president for the hell of it? Well,
it's funny. I think of myself as, the product of my whole life. And so I don't think of myself, I know that I'm incredibly lucky. I know that as a result of good luck and some hard work, I made a bunch of money. That isn't how I define myself. I don't think of myself that proves that I've had a successful life. If I didn't think I was having a meaningful and contributing to society life, I wouldn't think of myself as a success at all. I wouldn't think, that's not my measure of success. My measure of success is contribution, participation, achievement, not money. And so when people think of me in terms of money, I think, okay, I can understand why. But as you said, I push back because I don't see it that way. I view myself as successful in terms of contribution. So I want to say, I know it's not that famous, and I know you can't put it in one number.
But you did it.
But it's true.
A little bit of a different question that came up yesterday from Nick. Nick says of you, Tom Steyer, he wears some crazy Southwest print belt in his ads. Why?
Okay, Nick, thank God you asked that question. So first of all, it's from Kenya. It's a Maasai belt. And the reason that I wear it, besides the fact that I think it looks good, which I do, is that I was over there looking at some schools that some friends of mine had helped support that are specifically for girls. Because in a lot of the world, girls don't get educated as much or as long as boys. And if you want to see something that statistically, empirically makes the world better, educate girls. It's just unbelievable. And so I'll give you an example. Of the 20 things that we can do that are most impactful in terms of arresting the climate crisis, 3 of them have to do with educating girls.
What are they?
It's like family planning, the way that business is organized. I can't remember the third, but it's all about them having a different role in society. And it's every single one of them is dramatically positive, all about empowering and educating girls. So I partially wear this belt.
Are you wearing
Nick
it
should
today?
know.
Okay, there it is.
Wear it every day.
You can come and look at it after we're done
To
here, I guess.
remember that in this world, supporting just some decent basic things, like the education of women around the world, has a dramatic, unbelievably powerful and positive impact. So being a decent person and doing decent things that people tend to think of, isn't that nice, the soft stuff? It's not nice. It's hugely impactful and important.
I just got a 5-minute signal, which is a sign to me that I've mismanaged our conversation because there's a whole bunch more that I want to ask you. So let's move quickly. Robert on Facebook, and this is actually a good follow-up to the last question. Robert on Facebook asks, how would you restore our international relationships?
I'd do the right thing. We're a value-driven country. I'd rebuild our allies. I'd get away from the insane idea that we don't have allies, coalition. I'd work with our traditional allies around the world. I'd be a value-driven country that stands up for what's right, is good to our word, and people can trust us again. Boom. I'd do the exact opposite of Mr. Trump in everything, and climate would be my #1 priority, and we'd lead a coalition around the world to solve the world's biggest problem.
I have to ask you.
I'm going to talk really fast here.
Okay,
Adam.
that sounds good. I'll try to do the same. You recently experienced some negative headlines when a top campaign staffer in South Carolina resigned. They'd been caught stealing voter data from the Kamala Harris campaign. And a top campaign staffer of yours in Iowa resigned after he was caught offering cash in return for endorsements. My understanding is that you have said, essentially, these people left their posts as soon as I became aware of what they were doing, and that's something that people should give us credit for, take comfort in. But my sense, as someone who's never run an organization, is that the people who you pick to do work for you, it says something about your ability to run an organization, the people you hire for key roles. So why should people not find this troubling, that these 2 examples of malfeasance occurred?
Look, in neither of those instances was any law broken or did anything bad happen. Unauthorized actions were taken. We were on top of it right away. We did an immediate analysis and took action. That's exactly what you should do. I've run organizations for over 30 years. And things happen that you don't expect. And when they do, you have to be on top of them. You have to be value-driven. You have to deal with everything with integrity. And that's exactly what happened.
Did you know about either of these individuals' activities before they were reported?
Of course not. They were unauthorized. They happened. We found out about them, and we immediately dealt with them. So that's exactly what you need from an organization, is you need to have an organization where you have real values, where you live the values. When something happens that's unauthorized and improper, over. We deal with it and we move on. And I've done I've done this for decades. And when you hire hundreds of people, which you do in a campaign, which you do when you build big organizations, I can tell you things happen that aren't authorized, that you never anticipated, and that are improper. And when they happen, you have to deal with them immediately, openly, straightforwardly, and based on your values. And that's what happened here.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about impeachment. You have pushed for impeachment for years.
Two.
We've got public impeachment hearings starting today. How do you feel as you watch this move on to the next step that it's heading into?
Look, obviously, I think that this is the most corrupt president in American history, that he is a threat to the country and to the safety and health of the American people, that we have one law, that no one's above it, and that we should hold this man to the same law that we hold everyone else accountable. But it's the people that count. So that I didn't argue that he should be impeached. We went out and got over 8 million people to sign a petition to drag Washington to do the right thing, because everything that we're seeing now was very clear 2 years ago when I started the need to impeach petition. But let me say something else. I'm sitting here saying government's broken. I'm saying I believe the people have it right. Trust the people, not the politicians. That's really the story of impeachment. The American people knew this guy is a crook. This guy is corrupt. He covers up his corruption. It's endemic. And I said from the very first day, if you don't believe me, read tomorrow's paper. And if you don't believe tomorrow's paper, read the next day's paper, because it's only going to get worse. But if my thesis is government's broken, trust the people. This is the exact example of what I think.
I think this is my one final question I get to ask you. Are you maybe giving the American people a little too much credit? Because we've seen support for impeachment grow markedly in the past few weeks, but it's still around half the country that believes the president should be impeached, and a similar amount of the country that thinks he shouldn't. So are you sure this is a case study in the wisdom of direct democracy?
I actually do. I am. And I'll tell you why, Adam. I've been pushing for public televised hearings. Let us see. Most Americans, and I know this is going to come as a shock to you, don't spend their time thinking about politics. They spend their time thinking about their family. They spend their time thinking about the Patriots. They spend their time thinking about their job and what they're going to do on Saturday afternoon. They don't spend their time thinking about politics. As people are aware of this, and it's going to be, as I've said from the beginning, this is must-see TV. This is the soap opera to end all soap operas. It's reality TV for the most powerful person in the world being put up on trial. I trust the American people to watch it without the editing of any, TV channel to tell them what to think. Give us the facts. Let us make up our mind. That's the court that counts, the court of public opinion. That's the people I trust. I've traveled around this country full-time for 7 years. I've talked to people. We did more than 50 impeachment town halls in red states, blue states, and purple states. The American people are fantastic. Fantastic. Trusting them is the best choice we can make. Everything I'm pushing for is trust the compassion and the bravery and the wisdom of the American people. And this is a perfect example. I believe we'll get it right, because I believe we always get it right.
He is Tom Steyer. He's a Democratic candidate for the presidency in 2020. You've been watching him from WGBH's studio at the Boston Public Library in the latest installment of our digital town halls or town meetings with presidential candidates. Tom, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Adam, it's very nice to meet you.
Really appreciate it.